Shall we begin?
I think we should.
Okay.
So my name's Camilla. I'm here to introduce Catherine today. We've been working on Sheffield Tree Week for a few months. I think it was an idea that came about in lockdown as a means of really starting a conversation about trees in Sheffield. And so it's fantastic that over the week of events that we've got lined up, so all the different talks that you could attend on tree planting, on community forestry, on ash dieback, on street trees in London, we've got a whole host of different things, as well as a really, really strong set of resources on the website. So it's been a fantastic community that's come together to help make the first Sheffield Tree Week happen. So we're glad that you're here, but we'd also like to see you at some of the other events over the course of the week, not least on Friday. I think Catherine's really pulled off something in getting the street tree strategy launch happening here. So Sheffield Tree Week, I think, is going to have been, got a little place in history. Anyway, so without any further ado, Catherine Nutchins, who's Sheffield's Community Forestry Manager, is going to talk about community forestry in Sheffield.
Yeah, I am. Thank you very much, Camilla. Yeah, just a few housekeeping things. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes. So if you'd like to ask a question, if you have any questions to ask, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see there's a Q&A box. And if you just want to put your question in there, and then we'll answer those questions at the end of the talk. If the internet fails, because these things do happen, just bear with us, hang on in there, and we'll see what we can do to get it fixed. Hopefully it won't, but you know what it's like. And also we're recording this webinar, and what I'll do is put the recording on the event page on the website after we've finished, probably a few hours. So yes, I hope that, if anyone has any problems, just stick it in the Q&A and we'll see what we can do. So okay. So I'm going to share my screen now. Look, there we go. Begin the presentation. There we go. So yes, I'm the community forestry manager in Sheffield. I've had the post since March. Since November, and it's been a bit crazy, to be quite honest. But it's been really good to be involved in such a positive role, and there's lots of opportunities for the future. But I thought what I'd talk about today is a bit about trees and woodlands in Sheffield, because we're a city of trees, and I think it's important to put the trees in Sheffield into context. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the statistics of our trees and woodlands through, we did a survey called iTree, and that told us a lot about what we currently have as far as our trees and woodland cover, as far as it is. I thought I'd talk a little bit about what the trees and woodland team do, because I think a lot of people don't know that, and just the different roles within the team. I'll talk about issues affecting trees, which is quite big for us at the moment, and then sort of zone in on community forestry and tree planting, and what we're thinking about there. So I'll start with Sheffield woodland history, because Sheffield's very well connected with woodlands, and it goes right back. If you go to Ecclesall Woods, and you know where to find it, there's a cup and ring stone. This was carved out of the stone. These markings were carved out of the stone in the late Neolithic, early Bronze Age, and no one really knows what they're for. It's something that you see all around the country, cup and ring stones, but it's a little bit of a mystery. But it shows that Sheffield was populated way back in the late Neolithic, and it's certainly an interesting archaeological feature in Ecclesall Woods. But where we really start to see things happen in Sheffield is actually up on Winkerbank Hill Fort. Now, this is an Iron Age hill fort, which is about 2,000 years old, maybe a little bit older. And there you see the first evidence of iron smelting in Sheffield, because as a city, it's very well connected with metallurgy and the smelting of metals. It runs right the way, right from the beginning of settlements around this area. So they have, you know, bits of what we call slag, which is what's left over when you smelt iron. And when I used to have a previous hat on, I was Winkerbank Hillfort. If you haven't been up to Winkerbank, you should definitely go there. It's very impressive. You get a 360 degree view, and you can look down onto the Don Valley where Forge Masters and all that very modern metallurgical industry is based, but kind of reflect on the very old industry that Sheffield has had throughout its years. It's definitely worth a visit if you manage to get there. But yeah, coming back to early metal making, when I used to have a different hat on with Woodland Heritage hat, we did quite a lot of iron smelting with the University Archaeology Department. And we built quite a few of these furnaces in woods that we made out of clay from the ground. And then it took a lot, basically we put iron ore and charcoal into this chimney furnace, and that then over a period of about 5 hours produced the bloom of the furnace. Now that bloom, that kind of lava coming out there is slag, so it's molten rock, and also the metal that we want. The metal, the iron crystallizes, and you get the bloom there. All the slag is knocked off as it's worked, and you end up with wrought iron once you've beaten it and heated it up again and beaten it. But in order to get this tiny bit of iron here, you need at least sort of 5 or 10 kilos of charcoal. And if you think about that, how much wood you need to just create that tiny bit of iron, it gives you an idea about why Sheffield has had this woodland heritage, why there's so much wood, because the wood was intrinsically important to the metal industry. If we go a bit further forwards, a lot of the woods from kind of medieval times to the Industrial Revolution, and even further forwards from that, a lot of the woods were used for industry. They were coppice wood, so the trees were cut down to the base and then allowed to grow back up again, so you had a constant supply of wood. And that was then, charcoal burners would make that into charcoal. They'd burn it without any oxygen, that would burn off all the other compounds and just leave the carbon, so that could be used and made into charcoal. Is very good at getting things very, very hot, and that, you know, that would have been used for iron smelting in the beginning of the steel industry. This is certainly one bit of evidence, this gravestone in Ecclesall Woods of George Yardley. Some of you might know where that is. And he was burned to death in his cabin, poor old George Yardley. Obviously had a lot of friends, because they put the stone up there. And you can see that, you know, it's interesting, their jobs themselves being gamekeepers and besom makers. That's a broom maker. And an innkeeper is kind of local, you know, again, kind of linked with you know, with the lands. So it kind of gives you an idea of the industry that was going on at the time. One of the other industries that also happened was also metallurgical, but it wasn't steel, was lead smelting. And if you go around a lot of the woods in Sheffield, this is Ecclesall Woods again, but they are in other places, you'll see these weird sort of craters in the ground, and they were called Q-pits. They've got kind of opening at one side, and they were used to make white coal. Now, white coal is basically super dried wood. It's not burnt with no oxygen like charcoal, but it's super dried, and it would have been there to get the right temperature for lead smelting in the city. So you haven't got the steel and the iron, you've also got the lead smelting as well. So these woods, the woods of Sheffield, were intrinsic to the industry, to Sheffield being a world famous steel city. And once we get to the 20th century, I mean, by that time, a lot of the industries have moved over to coke, which was able to get things hotter, and it become much more industrial and technological in the way that steel was being made. So a lot of the land was handed over to the people of Sheffield. I think, J.G. Graves certainly was instrumental in quite a few of them, and the Fitzwilliam estate as well. And it's quite interesting. This quote is from an article in the paper at the time, the Telegraph and Star, when it was such a thing, about, in this extensive habitation, nature dwells in her loveliest garb. Here is to be found the antidote to the poison of town life. And I think it's quite interesting because it's not really changed that much, is it? We see so much about, getting out in nature, certainly over lockdown, getting out in nature is so good for us. It relaxes us, it de-stresses us. And it's just, it has carried on. It's not a new thing. It's definitely been there. So we are lucky that we still have these woods. We have all these woods in Sheffield. A lot of them are ancient woodlands, and it's a legacy that we have from that steel industry. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the trees as we have them now. It's a bit of a small map there, but the map on the left there is all our woodlands in Sheffield. That's the shape of Sheffield, and we did a survey in 2017 and 18 called iTree Eco, because basically we wanted to find out all about what trees we had, and all the value that they bring with them. Now, iTree, basically what it does, it's something that's used all around the world, iTree Eco. It started off in America, but it's come over here, and quite a lot of cities have done it now. Certainly Leeds have done theirs, I think, quite recently. It gives you an idea of the structure of the tree population, so that's kind of species and size. It then has clever algorithms that are all related to which species and how big they are, about how air quality is improved by the trees, things like carbon dioxide and stormwater. It shows us the annual benefits, so it kind of monetizes these. It's just sometimes useful when we want to prove that they have benefits. Sometimes, unfortunately, money is the only way that, that it talks, basically. And it's widely used all around the world. But practically for us, it was the tree team that went out and did it, and some of the rangers. And basically we've got our mapping team to put, I can't remember, 230 odd circles, basically randomly on a grid on Sheffield. So these circles would just drop randomly. You'll notice in this area, in the Peak District, it's the squares are slightly bigger. That is because there's not many trees in the Peak District. So the kind of worthwhile of us going to survey it was, it wasn't really worth it because there weren't that many trees. Those big squares have been factored in. There's been an algorithm that makes them value as much as everything. So they all do count up together and give an accurate view. Now, within these circles, now this is an example of one of the circles that we would have had to go and survey. So we had a sheet like this, and that would show us where the plot was. This is obviously at number 81 Old Park Road, but it's also along this road here as well. So we'd have to survey all trees that fell within that circle, which meant that we'd often have to go and knock on people's doors and ask them if it was okay, and we'd come and measure their trees. And we measured things like the girth of the trunk, the canopy cover, the species, what condition the tree was in, whether there's any understory or anything like that. So often in woodland you might have a holly that was underneath a pine tree or something like that, and loads of different factors that we took into account. So they were really well surveyed. Sometimes some of the circles fell on places like in the middle of a reservoir, or on some railway lines was one of them, or in the middle of the M1, and we obviously couldn't survey those. So only some of the circles were lucky enough to have trees in them. But, you know, that's all taken into account. So then what happened then was Kenton Rogers from Treeconomics took it back and used his magic to make all the calculations of all the different bits of data that we collected. And it enabled us to find out some things about our woodlands. So from the iTree survey that we did, we found that there was 3,864,000 trees that comes from iTree, and that's any tree that is over 7 centimeters trunk diameter. Then we did go back and we thought, well, actually, there's trees with a smaller trunk diameter than 7 centimeters, so we think there's at least another 600,000 trees with a smaller trunk diameter. That's probably a quite conservative estimate, I would say. But it means that we can work out that we've got approximately 4.5 million trees, which is quite a lot of trees. The other thing it showed us is that most of the trees, which is unusual for a lot of cities, most of the trees are in public ownership. I think because we have that legacy of so many woodlands, that, you know, you can kind of see that through there, and only 40% of these trees are in private ownership, which is you know, it's quite a good thing. It means that they are to a certain extent protected. Also, the species mix is quite good. I mean, certainly I know that there were iTree surveys done on other cities where the top tree was a leyland cypress, which is obviously, you know, it's not great. It's not a kind of natural, what you'd expect in natural woodlands, but we do all right. I mean, we have a lot of silver birch, which is what you'd expect. It's a, you know, the tree that grows up first in woodland. It's a very fast growing tree. It's, you know, obviously a native tree. Sessile oak is the second one, which again, you'd expect that kind of birch and oak woodland. Sessile oak is the sort of oak tree that grows tends to be the north of England. English oak, which you can see we've got 3.9%, that tends to grow in southern England. But yeah, that's as we would expect in a natural woodland. Sycamore, we've got quite a lot of those on hedgerows and things like that. Again, you know, hawthorn, the good native tree. Ash, we've got 6.6% ash trees, which I'll talk about a bit later on. I mean, ash is a lovely tree, but we are worried about it. And then willow is a very, like the oak tree, willow is a really good tree for biodiversity, so it's good to see all that willow there. And then oak and cherry and holly, rowan, you know, they're all, you know, good native trees, so it's quite good to see. And then obviously there's everything else there, which runs to about 200 or 300 species. So yeah, so that was quite good to see that we have that kind of species mix. And then you can see the trunk size, or we would call the stem size. As you would expect, there's lots of small trees. I mean, that's kind of what you'd expect in a natural woodland, that they all, you know, they do grow in that way. And then as you get older, as you get to the larger trees, there's far fewer older trees. A bit larger trees as you get more. Because if you think about it, you might have lots of say beech regeneration. So there's lots of little beech trees next to one big beech tree. And then the trees outcompete each other as time goes on, and you just end up with one. And we were quite pleased to see that most of our trees are in excellent condition. This is something that if we do iTree Eco again, which we might do because it'd be good to compare the statistics, that we might see a bit of a change in this, given that we had a very dry spring in 2018, which certainly did for some birches and rowans. And also we're seeing a bigger influx of diseases. So it's good to have this baseline data to have a look at things. You can see that obviously some of the trees here were certainly not doing so well. And then life expectancy, this is what we usually call, I think it's a safe, useful life expectancy. So it's while, you know, if a tree is in a very public area, you know, if it's not safe, then obviously it might get removed before a tree, say in a woodland, that might be completely dead and we just leave it because it's no danger to anyone. But that's good. I mean, we're looking at 80 years plus generally for our trees, which is, you know, which is really good. Carbon sequestration. You can kind of see here what's doing all the work. So we've got Betula pendula, which is a birch, and I mean, they're very fast growing. So, you know, they're absorbing quite a lot of carbon quickly, because one thing about mature trees, if you have a mature oak tree and it's reached that kind of point where it's not going to get any bigger, it does stop sequestering carbon. It's those slightly smaller trees that are still growing that are putting on that carbon. But then we've got Quercus petraea, so it shows that we've got quite a lot of stuff growing there. That's sessile oak, that one. And then sycamore is quite good. It's another fast grower. Protegus, that's hawthorn. So, you know, again, and then kind of going down, you know, going down a lot of the native trees there. It tends to be the fast growing. We've got goat willow there and pine and stuff. So yes, you can, and that measures how much. So we've got it has how many tons it is storing. Sometimes not as much as you would quite expect. We thought it might be a bit more than that, but yes. So pollution removal, it has some, you know, it has quite, you know, some significant pollution removal here. You can see that it's removing sort of 5 million worth of things like nitrogen dioxide. I think this graph on its own, to be quite honest, isn't that helpful. Oh, what happened then? There we go. But it's good to see that in context, you know, compared with other things. I think with pollution, you know, looking at other ways of cutting pollution as well as this is useful. And this is the value of what we're looking at. So we've got 1.39 million of carbon sequestration. We've got 34.8 million of storage. Obviously, the rainwater runoff, 1.81 million. You know, and so you can kind of see there that those are large numbers. It shows you that our trees are working, you know, and they contribute significantly to, you know, to Sheffield's well-being. And then there's a kind of cost of replacement, which I think is a slightly odd figure because hopefully we wouldn't cut down more trees. But anyway, there we go. And then comparable with other cities, you can certainly see that, you know, we do quite well, you know, in that Sheffield, you know, trees per person, we have, you know, 7 trees per person as opposed to, say, Greater London, which has 1. And, you know, we have 18.4% tree cover. It would be nice to increase that if possible, but we do have a lot of trees and you know, and it's all part of that woodland legacy that we, you know, that I talked about earlier. So as a city, we're pretty good as far as trees go, but we can always be better. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what we do as the Trees and Woodlands team. We kind of divided up into 3 areas. There's the tree officers, and I used to be a tree officer a long time ago, since November. It wasn't that long ago. The woodland officers that are kind of in charge of the woodland estates, and there's community forestry, which obviously I'm manager of, and then the rangers, and that makes up the Trees and Woodlands team. So tree officers, you know, what do they do? They're very important. They're basically the kind of tree doctors. They're the people that keep the trees safe. So they will be at any one time inspecting trees and woodlands, basically in parks and countrysides. They'll have a look at them in schools, in car parks, you know, wherever there's trees growing on land that are, apart from highways that have their separate trees and woodlands department, not trees department. And they're looking out for things like fungi, for tree defects, for things like that, and monitoring the trees and making sure that they're safe and things. And if they're not safe, then, you know, then they instruct the tree surgeons to go in and do some work on them. But it's only trees that are endangering people that have work done on them. At this time of year, particularly after lockdown, they answer a lot of inquiries from the public, usually about shading. So someone will say, well, trees shading. Unfortunately, we can't do anything about shading. It's just like a neighbour anywhere else. And but, you know, generally where trees have become problematic for whatever reason, we'll go and have a look and see whether there's anything we can do. They monitor pests and diseases, which again is a big thing that we're doing at the moment, looking at ash dieback. And we've always got an eye out for what's happening in our woodlands and making sure, you know, that we do know what's happening so we can act on it. We also write professional tree surveys where, you know, where something might be changing on the line to make sure the trees are properly recorded and there's a report somewhere about the trees. And also we just keep up to date because, you know, arboriculture is changing all the time. So we just need to know kind of what the latest thinking is on various things, and we do try and do that. There's also a tree officer in planning. If you've got big trees in your garden or you're in a conservation area, you might have dealt with the tree officer in planning. Basically, any request for work on trees in conservation areas or a tree preservation order, they would go and have a look at that and either, you know, usually allow the work or not allow it if it's, you know, if it's a particularly important tree. They can create new protection orders, basically where trees are under threat. So if a tree is seen to be under threat, then you can put an emergency TPO on it so that it's protected. And they also advise on planning decisions where trees are affected. And it's quite a hard job. It's much more enforcement than being a tree officer in parks and countryside. It's, you know, it's dealing with trees in particular instead of trees in general. And it does require quite a lot of knowledge and, you know, strength to get that job done properly. The woodland officers, if any of you have had, you know, have worked with woodlands or anything like that, you'll probably know some of the woodland officers. And we've got one for the north and one for the south. They manage all the woodland estate in the city, so it's everything from, you know, the ancient woodlands like Woolly Woods and Exall Woods to the woodland estate, the forest estate out in the Peak, where there's, you know, there's kind of commercial forestry taking place. They have to, because they're managing the woodlands, it's obviously a lot about, you know, improving the footpaths and managing antisocial behaviour like motorbikes and things like that. They work quite a lot with the friends groups to, you know, sort out problems and to, you know, work in partnership so that the woods are really good for everybody. And then also in conjunction with the outdoor city, so there's a lot of mountain biking, things like Lady Canning's and Parkwood Springs and run routes and things like that. And then obviously forestry, you know, and we do get a little bit of income from the forestry in the Peak District. Which brings us to community forestry, which is our role. So basically we plant trees. I think that's probably the simplest thing. We're planting trees in the city. This picture is from our planting at Bowl Hills just before lockdown, and it was great. We had about 200 people. It was really good, and it's so nice to see so many volunteers coming out to plant trees. We work in partnership with the community, because without our volunteers we wouldn't be able to get the trees in the ground. We also manage memorial trees and commemorative trees. This is, you know, if people want to commemorate something, then they can purchase a tree from the council and have it planted if we can find a space for it. It's a little bit tricky at the moment, but hopefully we'll be back online soon. But also for planting, we need to make sure that we're getting the right tree in the right place, and you know, that trees aren't planted that are going to cause the problems that as a tree officer you see all the time, that are not too close to houses, that are not causing shading, you know, they're not getting in the way of people's views or whatever. So it's tricky. Finding places to plant trees can be tricky sometimes. And then finally the rangers, who are really good, who are a great team. They connect people with their green spaces. They work a lot with friends groups, but they also manage the estate. So, you know, where paths need clearing, or, you know, if hedges need dealing with, you know, all that kind of countryside management, and the rangers do all of that. They, you know, they work a lot with the public, and they also run activities for schools. And they're really vital, the rangers. They're the connection between, you know, often parks and, you know, countryside and people. They're there on the ground, and we've got a really good team of rangers. So that brings us on to some of the threats to our trees. It's something that, I mean, maybe it's always going to be an issue. If you're a tree officer, you know, it's what you're looking out for, because where trees are becoming diseased, then it's where you need to worry about them, because we don't want them to fall down, and you'll have to deal with them if they could become dangerous. But one particular threat to our trees at the moment is ash dieback. We're really worried. We went to the Peak District about, I don't know, about a year and a half ago, and had a look at some of how they've been dealing with their trees. It was out in Dovedale, and they had basically 90% ash woodland, and it would been absolutely decimated by this disease. And they, you know, they were saying to us, we cannot stress enough, need to, you know, look at this now. It's in Sheffield at the moment. Our tree officers are currently looking at surveying the ash trees and trying to tackle the worst of it now, because it is likely to kill 90% of our ash trees. And if you have an ash tree in your garden, I would keep a close eye on it, because what the problem is with ash dieback is that it makes the trees very, very brittle. And if we want a climber to go out and take out the dangerous branches, or to, you know, to deal with things that are likely to come brittle and fall on the public, we can't ask a climber to climb a tree that is likely to snap. So we really need to manage the, you know, the safety of everybody around these trees. And it's an absolute travesty. You know, it's a real shame to see all of these trees, you know, such an important native tree, you know, suffer in this way. But, you know, we're dealing with it. And later on in the week, actually, Nathan McQuinney and Luke Barley will be talking about ash dieback. So if you want to know more about that, then tune in on that one. But yes, it's not just ash dieback, unfortunately. We've got diseases like bleeding canker of horse chestnut, which often makes it kind of gives the bark, it makes horse chestnut's bark go very eczema-y. It makes it all peel off and crack, and often can kill off the tree. Phytophthora is an issue. It's oh, whoops, one sec. There we go. Phytophthora is a disease that you get, is kind of black staining, and what the disease does is ring bark. It kills the cambium, which is basically how the tree gets all its waters and nutrients. It's just underneath the bark of the tree, and it can kill off trees very quickly. As certainly seen them on lime trees and some beech trees, and I think we've seen it on all sorts, actually, on alders and things like that. Oak processionary moth. This currently isn't in Sheffield. They've got a lot of it in London, but we're keeping an eye on it, because although it doesn't do loads of damage to the trees, the caterpillar has extremely irritant hairs on its back, and if anyone is around with asthma or anything like that, it can really, you know, make people quite poorly. So we're keeping a very close eye on oak trees, and checking them for oak processionary moth. And another one that again is a problem in London and currently hasn't got here is Massaria in plane trees, that can cause a lot of the branches to snap out. On the continent, it's really, for some of the lovely plane tree avenues in France, it's absolutely killed everything off. So far, we've been okay with it here, but again, it's something that we're looking out for. So yeah, so it can be a bit depressing sometimes. There's so many threats. These larch trees affected by Phytophthora, which I don't think it's happened so much in Sheffield, but in Wales and things, it's completely wiped out whole stands of larch. But trees are quite, they do have a hard time of it because they also have to deal with climate change. The random weather that we get really affects trees. Like I said earlier about, you know, the birches and the rowans, some of those have had it because of the dry springs and things. And even if the trees don't die, it puts extra stress on. And if the tree's poorly already, then, you know, it makes it difficult to be able to fight off any diseases and fungus that gets into it. So it's a big worry. But something that you can do is just make sure that if you are ever buying trees, you know, that you check that they're, well, preferably British grown, really, because a lot of these diseases are brought in from imported plants, and you know, and that's how they get here. So when you check, it's always important to check your plants and where they're grown. They're not just kind of brought in en masse from, you know, from somewhere that you don't know. It doesn't say anywhere, but British grown is best. Okay, so that brings me to community forestry. We currently our aim is to plant 10,000 trees every year, yes, hopefully we should be able to do that with your help. I say, I mean, we've I could go a little bit further into what we do. At the moment, we are identifying sites to plant trees and to look at planting plans. We're working with communities and groups to plant trees and to look after them, which I think is important, because it's all very well putting a tree in the grounds, but it's also important to make sure that it's able to survive there, because that's just the beginning of planting a tree. It's got to get to maturity and really to be worth it. And then memorial trees, as I said, bringing in funding is a big one, because there is quite a bit of funding available for tree planting, which is very welcome. And looking at the future as well, because I mean, things are changing quite quickly. So, you know, being on the ball and paying attention to what's going on is important. So the benefits of trees, some of you might have, just stop doing that. Yes, there we go. So some of you might have I've seen this sort of diagram before. I mean, trees are great and they do so much for us. You know, they intercept the rainwater, and you know, they can increase property value. They provide habitat for wildlife. You know, they provide a windbreak and shading. You know, they mitigate flooding. They do loads of really, really good stuff. They also do lots of stuff that really annoys people. So it's so important to get the tree planted in the right place, because if you put a giant forest tree right next to a house, odds are that that tree will cause problems in the future. So just trying to get it right and, you know, not create problems for the, you know, for people in the future is really, really important. So I've been thinking about this, and one of the things that we want to do is make sure that we do this. And I kind of think, you know, we need to think about what a tree is for. Now, when we plant trees, all trees, to a certain extent, if they survive and grow on, will help contribute to carbon capture, because as they grow, then they put on, you know, they put on carbon, they take it on. But they also, you know, I think certainly up in the hills and stuff, they're very useful for slowing down floodwaters, and, you know, even rainfall. They catch rainfall as it falls on streets and things like that. So they will slow down the flow, the peak flow of flood events. So they're really good for that. And also pollution as well. They do capture some pollution. So a tree should be, you know, there should be, most trees that are planted, if not all trees that are planted, will benefit the climate in some way. Biodiversity, I mean, this is a wood on lockdown. These are out in an ancient woodland, I think in the Moss Valley, which is possibly not Sheffield, but anyway, but there we go. It's biodiversity in the Moss Valley. Now these are great because you've got lots of trees put together. You know, you've got lots of carbon capture because you haven't just got the trees, but you've got the mycorrhizae, the fungus under the ground, you've got the bacteria, and you've got the plants, the understory, and all the squirrels and the beetles and everything. So it's created its own ecosystem, And, you know, and that's really, you know, it's really important. So with a tree here, if you take one of these trees, then, you know, it's contributing to capturing carbon. It's probably not absorbing that much pollution, but it's certainly mitigating some flooding, and, you know, and it really helps that ecosystem there, that woodland ecosystem. So another reason for trees, what are trees for? Well, here's some trees. Now, these wouldn't be so good at biodiversity. I mean, because they haven't got many friends. So this is a tree in Graves Park here, this one on the left. It hasn't got many friends around it, so you haven't got those fungal networks as much, and you haven't got quite as much, you know, as much habitat, but it's going to have some. These cherries, these are on Northcote Avenue over lockdown. Everyone said, oh, you must go and look at those cherries. They're called Kansan cherries, and they're not great for biodiversity because they're not good for bees, because the nectar, I think, I don't think they have any nectar in those double flowers. But they are, people love them. You know, they're great for at least 2 weeks of the year. But they probably have very poor biodiversity in that, you know, the soil, there's not good soil underneath there, you know, but they look great. You know, that's what they're valuable for, is for people to really care about them, and, you know, that to lift people's spirits. And this tree as well, actually, going back to this sycamore in Graves Park, it's actually part of the heritage of Graves Park, because it does run up an old trackway. It's the remnants of probably an old hedgerow. So, you know, thinking about that amenity value, you know, why is it good in the landscape is important. And then the economy. Now, I mean, this looks a bit scary, I suppose, with all this logging and things, but you know, it is important. These trees have captured carbon, and it's a sustainable use. Using wood is a sustainable material. And, you know, if it's put into a house or whatever, then that has captured that carbon, and then new trees will go, so you're capturing further carbon. But there's things like agroforestry and things like that, you know, that are also, that creates economic sustainability. So it's, you know, it's creating income for the land that's there. And I think that's important, because if a piece of land creates income, for whatever reason, it does help protect it. You know, if you take whatever's on it there, if you take it away, it's no longer gaining that income. So, you know, it's very important to think about these things. Biodiversity wise, it depends. I mean, things are changing, I think, as time moves forward, and people are getting more enlightened about having different species in plantation woodlands, and, you know, things like agroforestry. Wood pasture is fantastic for biodiversity, and, you know, has that flood mitigation, and also could look quite good as well. I mean, the trees around Lady Canning's and stuff have provided a place for people to go mountain biking, so it does look great, and also it's providing a, you know, a resource, and an amenable resource for people to use. So yeah, so it's good. But certainly, I think probably what is important the most for community forestry and new forestry is about people, and people's engagements with trees. I mean, planting trees has a lot of mental and physical health benefits. Just getting out there, you know, doing something good, you know, having that feeling that, you know, you're doing something for the environment. Just being out with other people is nice, and, you know, and being out in nature at that time, it's, you know, it's a good reason to go. And then once you've planted the trees, just watching them grow, you know, there's something nice about knowing that you planted a tree 10 years ago, and, you know, and there it is. You can say, I planted that tree, and now it's providing habitats for things, or, you know, giving you apples or anything like that. So you know, it's an important thing. And if people plant these trees, then, you know, if we can provide links with the trees and the woodland, then they become custodians of them. So, you know, so there's, you know, the further watering that could be done, and mulching, making sure that they're not having to compete with weeds around them. And if we can encourage local people to do that, then, you know, it's really good news for the trees. And with community forestry, we've had some great partners. Kids Plant Trees in particular have been fantastic, just, you know, providing support for planting, and the trees themselves, actually, from the Woodland Trust. We've worked with a lot of schools, with Good Gym as well, who have been brilliant. These two here, Annie and Tom, they planted that entire hedge behind them to offset their carbon for their honeymoon, which I don't think, unfortunately, they've gone on yet. I've got stuck here, but but what a great thing to do, and they are fantastic. They're amazing good, Jim. They're getting so many trees so quickly. They're really, really good. So, but yeah, we work with a lot of friends of groups, with the Scouts. We've worked a lot with Muslim youth organisation, where they've actually come to us to ask to plant trees, and it's been great actually. It's been really nice to see how many people just want to help plant trees and to input into it. So it's been really good. Yeah, just one last thing. One of the things that they're talking about in arboricultural circles at the moment is the problem with climate change, and the need to have trees that are resistant to disease. And it's kind of, there's a big debate about native and non-native trees, because certainly in the streets that become like deserts when it's been dry, and if you're thinking about planting a tree in a street, it's not in a natural environment, it's made grounds. So they say, well, let's put in more kind of Mediterranean and more trees that are able to survive these kind of very hot, dry conditions. It's a good point, because we want trees to survive. That's the most important thing. But certainly we have so much woodland around Sheffield, so much native woodland, that I think we can have both. I think we can look at different ways. It's all about getting the right tree in the right place and doing it properly. And the future, well, who knows? Who knows what the future is? We're always looking for places to plant trees. It's one of the probably biggest things in community forestry, is finding a good place to plant trees that aren't going to get in the way of anybody, or they're not going to detract from an area, not going to take away space to play, or or meadowland or whatever. So finding those places to plant is something we're constantly out on the lookout for. Looking at more external funding, I think again it's been difficult this season to kind of work out the best way of doing that, but we're putting funding bids in and seeing where we get. It'd be really nice to have a volunteer hub around tree planting, maybe formalise it a little bit more in the future, so we have people who are dedicated to looking after trees in the city. And again, it's something we're working on. And then I need to put together a tree planting strategy, so that make sure that we're following proper arboricultural guidelines across everything that we do across parks and countryside. So there is quite a lot to do, but we'll have to wait and see what happens in the future. And then I can advertise Sheffield Tree Week. Come to Sheffield Tree Week. There's lots more happening. There's lots I've talked about really today that we go into further detail about. So yeah, have a look on it and see what else you'd like to see. Right, that's my alarm. There we go. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you were all able to hear me, and I hope that's all good to you. So I will hand over to Camilla, if I can. Camilla, are you there?
I am here. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, that was brilliant. We've got 7 questions from people. So I'm wondering if the best way, are you able to see them on your screen?
I am able to see them. Do you want to read them out? And then
I'll read them out. Yeah, I'll read them out for everyone. So the first one this came in sort of 22 minutes in. So it's about the I1 survey. And the question is, if you were to repeat the survey, would you survey exactly the same trees and area for comparison, or would it be a different?
That's right. Yeah, it's S right. I can see that. Yes, we would, because that's how you'd compare it. It's because it's a random sample test. It's not always it's not going to be absolutely pinpoint accurate. But I think we would go back to the same areas again and survey the same things, because then we can see how it changes over time. I mean, I'd have to slightly refer to Jerry Gunton, who led on that, who's the tree manager. but I think that would be what we would do. So I hope that answers your question.
And then the next was about whether beech trees were included on the percentage of species that were identified in iTree.
I'm trying to think whether they were. If they weren't, it's because we haven't got that many beech trees. Let me just have a look and share the screen again. See if we can, if I can find a slide that says, just make that small. Yeah, so beech trees here, they must have, there must not be enough beech trees to actually make that. They'll be in that chunk of other, I imagine. So I mean, there's probably not, as far as it goes, there's not that many beech trees apart from in some of the old woodlands. You know, whereas you know, beech isn't something that you'd find on hedgerows and things like that. So although beeches tend to be large trees in places like Ackles Woods or some of the gleedless woods, you know, they're not our commonest tree, which is as you'd expect for this bit of the world, really. If you were down in Buckinghamshire or somewhere like that, I think you'd probably see a lot more beech trees.
And the next question, I'd say, so this one from Kathy Hill, which is, how do you spot ash dieback? And I would say definitely come to the talk.
Yes,
with Nathan and Luke, if you want to. You know, we're going to go in depth as to what the implications are in Sheffield over the next few years. But I'm sure Catherine can give us a quick answer.
I can, yeah. I mean, certainly, if you're interested in ash dieback, then it's worth getting to the webinar. But spotting ash dieback, ash. I mean, it's almost, it does what it says in the tin almost, in that, you know, at this time of year when it's been so wet, the trees, you know, if you look at the sycamores and things, they're flushing, they're bushy. You look at the ashes and you can see light coming through them. They have bare stems at the tips. It's got this kind of tip dieback. You get this kind of pom-pom effect. If you want further information, it is worth looking at the Tree Council. The Tree Council have some really good resources about ash dieback, but there's also resources from the Woodland Trust as well on there. You know, there's quite a lot of information about it online that have been really helpful for, you know, for us and things. So yeah, that's kind of, I hope that answers your question.
And then the next from Paul Wood is, what percentage of Sheffield's trees are in woodlands, and how much of Sheffield's area is woodland?
That is a very good question. Off the top of my head, I can't say it, but I'm pretty sure that was one of the things that came out of iTree. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure to be able to answer that definitively. I know that we've got 180 woodlands, but they obviously need hectares of woodland, and I think we've got more ancient woodland than any other city. But as far as it comes to percentage of trees, ask me again. Ask me again. I'll have to go and look it up to see what percentage are, because I'm pretty sure that was one of the bits of data that iTree picked up. So sorry, Paul, I'm afraid I can't answer your question right now.
And then next from Janet Williams, she asks, so it's relating to planting street trees. Is there any interest in increasing the number of street trees, and especially on streets where it's clear that trees haven't been replaced?
That would be a question for the street tree strategy consultation on Friday. I work for Parks and Countryside, so I don't have any remit over the street trees myself. I would say that there probably is an interest. I think if there's somewhere that they can go and thrive, then I imagine that they will try and get them in, because, you know, they are looking at putting in more street trees, but it's just making sure that they're able to survive. But you know, as I say, that panel would be able to answer that question better than I can. Yeah, they should be able to give you a bit more of a definitive answer.
Yeah, so I've got to thank you, Riley, for an interesting talk. And then the next question is from Caroline Turner, who asks, who do we contact to volunteer?
In the we will put events that we're online that we're doing. So if you follow the Parks and Countryside's Facebook page, then you can see we'll put those events that are happening online. In time, I would like to, maybe formalise it a bit more. And there's other organisations in the city, like Kids Plant Trees, have been fantastic, of kind of having a slightly more organised volunteer offer. It's frustrating that we can't do it at the moment because currently Parks and Countrysides aren't working with kind of volunteer groups at the moment because of COVID. But in the future, hopefully, if not this planting season, the next by the next planting season, we should be ready to go. So keep an eye on Parks and Countryside's Facebook page, and that's the best way to come to volunteering things. But also, Kids Plant Trees as well are very useful and good, Jim. There's lots of partners that we have, but watch this space.
Brilliant. And then the next question, I think, is maybe a return to, or similar to the one preceding that, which is who looks after the street trees?
Yeah, well, the street trees are run by, it's kind of a consortium between Streets Ahead, which are the highways departments of the council, and Amy are the contractors, so they do all the work. It's all, I mean, it's kind of that strange thing where there's Parks and Countryside that look after almost all the other trees in the city, but the highways trees are, are slightly separate for that. And in a way, I mean, highway trees are interesting because they do need an awful lot more work than trees in parks, because there's so much more contact with people. So, it is up to them really. And considering what's gone on historically, it's really good now to see that they're coming together. But again, if you have got if you've got something that you want to input into that, they are doing the consultation on Friday, and then that'll be out to consult for a while as a document. So tune in on Friday.
Yeah, and I think it's always worth saying that people are allowed to water trees. If you see a tree that's been planted that needs a bit of like, we can all look after trees, I think maybe a bit more as well. So that's more than possible. The next question is from Deborah, and it's about the times and subjects of the other talks, which is one question, and then also what's happened about Dutch elm disease. Well, yeah, what's happened with Dutch elm disease? Times of subjects of other talks are on Sheffield Tree Week. So if you just Google Sheffield Tree Week, hopefully it should all be there under events. So it'll tell you all of that. Dutch elm disease is still here, very much so. The way that Dutch elm disease works is that there's a beetle that drills into the bark, and that beetle carries the disease. It makes little, what we call galleries, little sort of holes. They're quite pretty, but it makes all these little holes. But then the disease that the beetle carries gets into the tree, and again it kills the cambium, so the tree just dies straight away. But in order for the beetle to get in, the tree needs to have bark at a certain thickness. So there's lots of elms. If you look in local woodlands around Sheffield, still quite a lot of elm tree growing, but it'll only ever be about 15 centimeters diameter, something about that big. It'll only ever have a stem about that big because that's the size that the bark gets thick enough for the beetle to get in. There are a few like hybrid elms, like the Huntington elms that on the streets, things like the Chelsea elm that are slightly more resistant to the disease, but our kind of native elms are, we're still struggling. There's different breeds that they're bringing out all the time, and hopefully one day we'd see large elms in the city. But for the time being, that kind of native elm has disappeared, which is a big shame. And then I've got a question from Heather, which is asking about a row of dead birches at the top of Mearsbrook Park. So some are healthy and some are dead, and she was wondering what the problem is.
The problem with those is that it was the drought of 2018 that did them. I think they're just being left for dead wood. They keep being kept an eye on. And
What's the benefit of deadwood? You know, what for people who maybe wouldn't be clear as to why you'd keep deadwood in a woodland?
Well, deadwood is as valuable for biodiversity as live wood is. You know, all the different types of insects and fungi and things that you know that make it their home. It's, you know, it's really, really important to have that deadwood there. So where we can, we try to leave, you know, deadwood in woodlands and things. But you know, it kind of, it's a balance between that and obviously it being a hazard and falling on someone's head. So yeah, but the birches, I mean, if you keep your eyes open, you'll see there's quite a lot of dead birches around, and that was that drought in 2018. It just killed them off. They're not good at storing water really at all.
And the next question is from Chris Brewster, which is, what do you think of using the Japanese idea of mini woodlands? So these are... It's
an interesting one. You know what? Because we had a little WhatsApp discussion about this, and yeah, well, you know, why not? You know, I was thinking I might try and find somewhere this year to maybe kind of put these because I suppose the idea of these mini woodlands are they're very closely planted together whips, you know, that they've tried in Paris and things like that, and you know, that there's an argument that it's better for biodiversity because it creates, you know, a lot of kind of very complex habitat, I suppose, for small creatures. You know, the problem that would be if we did that everywhere is that it'd be a massive litter collector because it'd be so dense. It'd be very difficult to manage, and you know, it would cause problems. You're not going to get great trees out of that. You know, you're not going to get lovely straight up trees necessarily, but you will get something that's great habitat. So we could try it somewhere where there's not a lot of people, you know, where if it's dense and things like that, then, you know, why not? We're not short of trees to plant. We've got a lot of whips that we could stick in the ground. So certainly a little experiment somewhere would be good.
Got some more thanks from Elke St. John. And then I think maybe the last question, which is, are there any tree planting initiatives underway as part of rewilding, so in the Peak District?
I don't know whether it's rewilding per se, but you could still count it as rewilding. The RSPB and the Eastern Moors Partnership have been doing a great job planting up a lot of the cloughs there, which are the kind of, you know, the banks of the streams that run through things, and that's all with native trees and things. And the idea is obviously it helps mitigate flooding, but it's providing an extra habitat for all sorts of, you know, different wildlife and things. And what you wouldn't want to do is plant a lot of the Peak District up with trees. I mean, it would make our because it's so treeless up there. You know, if we planted it, it would be brilliant because you have suddenly all these trees. But it would actually have a negative effect on the carbon because the peatland there is really good at absorbing carbon. That holds so much carbon. And if you were to put suddenly cover it with woodlands, it wouldn't actually really benefit the you know, that kind of moorland very much, and you would actually release carbon as a result of it. So that clough planting is there. It's creating a mosaic, but you wouldn't want to have total tree planting out there, really. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, and we've got another. I think it's more of a comment from Julie Riley saying that Yorkshire Water and SRWT.
Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust.
Yeah, I'm not great with the immediate acronym. I've done some planting near Midhope and Underbank to link existing woodland.
Yeah, well, it's been good. I mean, there's some, you know, there's lots of people out there planting trees, and, you know, mine's mainly on parks and places like that, but, you know, trying to join things up a bit. I mean, there's South Yorkshire, I can never remember what the acronym is. South Yorkshire, anyway, there's a group of us that are all tree planters around South Yorkshire, and there's a degree that the work that the Wildlife Trust are doing to try and pull it all together, and, you know, and I think it's, you know, it's good to have that kind of South Yorkshire view on things, because you know we can be greater than the sum of our parts. So you know, and it's about getting it right and not making mistakes, and you know, just going mad with tree planting to find out that you've destroyed some ancient meadow somewhere. So having a careful considered approach about the way that we plant trees, and you know, listening to everyone, consulting, all that kind of thing. It does take time, but I think it's, you know, definitely the right thing to do.
Fantastic. I think that nothing else is coming now. I think we've answered all of those. It's been really, it's always a bit, I like most, well, I enjoyed the talk obviously, but I think it's always really interesting to see, you know, what appetite is out there for people to get involved with tree planting, to find out more about the environment that we're all surrounded by, and ways of engaging and learning more. So yeah, do join us for more of the talks over the course of the week. There should be something for everyone, as it were.